Welcome back to our course on conflict of interest for professionals. In this module, we will discuss definitions of conflict of interest and the types of conflicts we may experience. What is conflict of interest? How would you define it? Well, there are hundreds of definitions out there, which differ in detail. Try this definition: the state of incompatibility of goals of two or more actors. Short, just 11 words. But what does it mean? I prefer this definition. Conflict of interest exists when the duties and responsibilities of an employee are, or potentially could be, compromised by his or her personal and private interests. It is simple and understandable, at least on its face. There is a related concept here: conflict of duty. How would you define a conflict of duty? A conflict of duty occurs when you perform multiple roles whose priorities or needs conflict with each other. For example, take a director of a crown corporation. They are expected to represent the minister's or government's views. However, they must also try to influence government decisions in the corporation's favor. These can represent ethical dilemmas in that one group benefits more than others, but you have no personal interest in the matter. Thus, conflicts of duty are related to, but different from, conflicts of interest. Now let's discuss whistleblowing. Suppose you know that your employer is doing something bad. Would you be violating a duty of loyalty to your employer by blowing the whistle? Yes, you would violate a duty of loyalty to your employer. The question is whether the violation is justified, measured against your conflicting duty to support the public good. Another concept related to conflict of interest is bias. How would you define bias? One can say that bias is a predisposition in favor of or against one thing, action, person, or group compared with another. Given our definition, bias is favoring one group or decision. But your favoring them would not necessarily enhance your personal interests. I am biased towards the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I personally gain nothing if they win. The important distinction between bias and conflict of interest is that biases do not necessarily involve enhancing one's interests. Now, people often divide conflict of interest into three types. An actual or real conflict of interest involves a direct conflict between your current duties and responsibilities and existing private interests. A perceived or apparent conflict of interest occurs when someone on the outside could perceive or conclude that your private interests could improperly influence the performance of your duties. The actual facts of the matter are not important here. What is important is perception. The final type is a potential conflict of interest. This is a situation that might arise in the future, if certain future events were to come to pass. Recalling our conflict of interest examples, Trudeau's vacations could be seen as perceived, conflicts of interest. We do not know of any special treatment that was actually given. Mr. Trump and his resorts are actual conflicts of interest. We know he spent time, and a lot of time, at his golf resorts. And athlete doping, again, being perceived. We rarely know what actually happens with drug tests. As I mentioned earlier, perceived conflict of interest is often seen as equally important as a real conflict. As the Supreme Court of Canada said, preserving the appearance of integrity and the fact that the government is fairly dispensing justice are as important as the fact that the government possesses actual integrity and dispenses actual justice. But perceptions are much harder to deal with. To clarify the differences between actual, perceived, and potential conflict of interest, let's discuss an example. So let's say you are a town planner in a small regional agency, and you and your supervisor regularly assess development applications. Well, to begin with, you have no conflict. This is part of your job. You assess applications, that's what you were hired for. Let's complicate things. You meet and marry a partner of a local architectural firm. Now you have a potential conflict. Your private interests are currently not relevant to your official duties if the architectural firm has no actual application in front of you, but they may put an application in the future. Thus, we have a potential conflict. But if that potentiality becomes real, your spouse's firm actually submits plans to your agency as part of a development application, but your supervisor assesses the application. Now we have perceived. Although you did not actually assess the application yourself, it's a small town, and some may consider that your private interests are relevant to and may have influenced the decision of your supervisor. We can make it more complicated. The supervisor allocates the file to you to assess. Now you have an actual conflict. And then lastly, a supervisor resigns and is not replaced quickly, leaving you as the town planner. And we're back to potential. We don't know that some future application will be a conflict, but the potential is there. So here we have the evolution of a conflict of interest, going from no actual conflict to perceived and potential all the way around. This concludes our discussion of conflict of interest definitions and types of conflicts. I invite you now to move to Module 4, where we will discuss a different type of interest.